Elliot Washington was 41 years old, and he had spent 15 years being the kind of husband who showed up for his wife, for his family, for everyone who needed something held together. He paid the mortgage on time, sent money to his mother every month without being asked, and never once complained about being the foundation everything else was built on. He was not flashy. He was not loud. He was steady, and the people who loved him knew exactly what that was worth. The people who didn't love him had made a different calculation entirely. On the day they buried his mother Dolores, as the preacher finished and the Memphis dirt was turned, a man in a suit approached Elliot at the graveside and pressed an envelope into his hands. Inside, divorce paper, filed 4 days earlier. His wife Celeste stood 15 feet away, back to him, checking her phone beside his mother's fresh grave. She had spent 3 years quietly building her exit, moving money, forging signatures, funding another man's business with equity she stole from their home. She had filed first, moved fast, and was already counting what she believed she'd won. What Celeste did not know, what she could not have imagined, was what was waiting inside a locked steel box in his mother's closet, and what his mother had been building in silence for 40 years. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The October sky hung like pewter over Memphis, heavy with the kind of clouds that promised rain but never delivered. Elliot Washington guided his Ford F-150 through familiar streets, each turn bringing him closer to Greater Harvest Missionary Baptist Church. The truck, 7 years old and meticulously maintained, moved with the steady reliability that matched its owner. His dark suit felt tight around the shoulders. He'd lost weight in the past week, though he couldn't remember skipping meals. Then again, he couldn't remember eating them either. The past 7 days had been a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and arrangements, the machinery of death that someone had to operate. And Elliot was always that someone. The church parking lot was already filling up. He recognized most of the cars, church members, family friends, people his mother had cleaned houses for over the years. Dolores Washington had touched many lives in her quiet way. Inside, the familiar scent of wood polish and old hymnals wrapped around him. The sanctuary looked exactly as it had when he was a boy, except now his mother's casket lay at the front, surrounded by blue flowers, her favorite color. He'd chosen them himself, like he'd chosen everything else. The program design, the order of service, the funeral home, the burial plot. Celeste's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she walked beside him. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than the funeral flowers, her grief constructed as carefully as her appearance. She squeezed his hand at regular intervals, a gesture that should have felt comforting but somehow didn't quite reach past the surface. From the second pew, Elliot watched people file in. His brother Ray nodded from across the room, talking quietly with Aunt Gloria. The pastor adjusted his collar near the pulpit, and Celeste, his wife of 15 years, kept her phone face down on her lap, her fingers twitching toward it every few minutes like it was calling to her. The service began. Elliot let the familiar rhythms of church wash over him. The prayers, the hymns his mother had sung for 31 years in the choir, the testimonies about her life. He managed the program from his seat, catching the deacon's eye when it was time to light the memorial candle, nodding to the soloist when her moment came. His mind drifted to the last conversation he'd had with Celeste about his mother 2 months ago. She could have done more for herself, Elliot, Celeste had said, that edge of dismissal in her voice that he always pretended not to hear. All those years working in other people's houses when she could have gotten training, moved up. He'd answered with silence then, the way he always did when Celeste talked about his mother, the way he'd been answering more and more over the past 2 years as distance grew between them like a slow-rising tide. He told himself it was just stress, just phases, just the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage. Celeste shifted beside him now, checking her watch. Her leg bounced slightly, a tell he recognized from faculty meetings and dinner parties that had gone on too long for her taste. Even here, even now, she was already somewhere else in her mind. The service ended. The procession to the cemetery moved like a black river through Memphis streets. Elliot drove the truck, Celeste beside him. The silence between them filled with the soft drone of the air conditioning and the occasional buzz of her phone, which she never quite silenced completely. At the graveside, the October wind picked up. The pastor's words scattered across the cemetery, catching in the trees. Ray stood on his right, solid as always. Aunt Gloria wept openly on his left. Celeste stood slightly apart, her perfect posture a reminder that she had never quite figured out how to fit into this family. The final prayer ended. People began moving toward their cars for the repast. Elliot stayed rooted, looking at the casket that held his mother. The woman who had worked 2 jobs to raise him and Ray, who had never once complained about the weight of being both parents at once. Then a man in a crisp suit appeared at his elbow. Not a mourner. His posture was too formal, his expression too practiced. "Mr. Elliot James Washington?" Elliot nodded. "Sir, I need to confirm you are Elliot James Washington of 1487 Oak Brook Drive, Atlanta, Georgia." Another nod. The man pressed an envelope into his hands. "You've been served, sir. I'm sorry for your loss." The envelope felt heavy, despite its lightness. Elliot opened it with steady hands that betrayed none of the earthquake happening beneath his skin. The words swam into focus. "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed 4 days ago, 2 days before his mother died." His eyes caught fragments. Irreconcilable differences. Equitable division. The Atlanta house. Spousal support. He looked up. 15 feet away, Celeste stood with her back to him, her phone held up like a shield between her and his mother's fresh grave, her fingers tapping out messages to someone else's life, the papers folded crisply, their edges sharp against Elliot's fingers as he tucked them into his suit jacket's inner pocket. The weight of them settled against his chest like a stone, but his face remained steady, composed. He straightened his tie, a habit from childhood, and walked toward his truck for the drive to the repast. The church fellowship hall hummed with voices and the clink of plates. Women from the missionary board had transformed the space into an ordered comfort. Fold-out tables draped in white cloths, steam rising from covered dishes, sweet tea in plastic cups that sweated in the warm air. Elliot moved through it all like a man underwater, hearing everything from a distance. He filled a plate he didn't want, accepted hugs he couldn't feel, and watched Celeste work the room with practiced grace. She touched elderly aunts' shoulders with just the right pressure, laughed at just the right moments with his cousins, helped serve punch with an efficiency that looked like caring. The same performance she'd perfected over 15 years of family gatherings. The numbers from the divorce petition scrolled through his mind like ticker tape, while he nodded through condolences. She wanted the house, the 3-bedroom craftsman in Atlanta's Virginia Highland neighborhood that his down payment had secured. Half his 401k, the retirement account he'd been feeding since his first job out of college. Joint accounts that she'd been steadily draining, he suspected, though he wouldn't know for certain until he checked the statements. Spousal support, based on his facilities management salary, versus her community college instructor's income. "You holding up okay, baby?" Aunt Gloria's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood before him with concern etched deep in her face. "Yes, ma'am," he answered, the lie smooth and practiced. "Just tired." Ray appeared at his elbow with a fresh plate of food. "Eat something, big brother. Mama would have your hide if she saw you picking at your plate like that." Elliot managed a few bites of Gloria's sweet potato pie, watching Celeste chat with his second cousins from Nashville. Her laugh carried across the room, the same laugh she used at faculty mixers and neighborhood gatherings. professional, warm, and completely hollow. The afternoon wore on. People began to leave, taking their empty casserole dishes and heartfelt condolences with them. Elliot thanked them all, remembered their names, promised to stay in touch. The machinery of grief operated smoothly under his careful management. Back at his mother's small house, where they were staying during the funeral, Celeste packed efficiently in their temporary bedroom. "I need to head back to Atlanta tomorrow morning," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "The department chair needs me for a curriculum meeting, and I have classes Monday." Elliot sat on the edge of the bed, watching her fold clothes into her carry-on. "Safe travels," he said quietly. She paused, a blouse half folded in her hands. Something flickered across her face. Surprise at his calm, perhaps, or disappointment at the lack of protest. "You're not coming back with me?" "Need a few more days here," he replied. "Estate matters to handle, papers to file." "Of course," she said, relief coloring her voice. "That makes sense. You always handle these things so well, Elliot." He watched her finish packing, her movements precise and practiced. She'd packed the same way countless times over their marriage. Conferences, family visits, work trips. He wondered how many of those trips had been what she'd claimed they were. The next morning, he dropped her at Memphis International Airport. She kissed his cheek, told him to take care of himself, and walked into the terminal without looking back. He drove straight to his mother's apartment afterward, the key heavy in his hand as he unlocked the door. The apartment felt both empty and full. Empty of his mother's presence, but crowded with her possessions. Small decorative plates on the walls, her Bible on the side table, church fans in a neat stack on the windowsill. Everything exactly where she'd left it, waiting for someone to decide its fate. He started in the bedroom, methodically sorting through drawers and shelves. It was when he reached the closet that he saw it. A small steel box pushed far back behind her winter coats. The sight of it triggered a memory. His mother pressing a key into his palm 5 years ago, her voice firm despite her illness. "Keep this safe," she'd said. "Open it when I'm gone." The key was on his ring now, where it had lived ever since that day. He reached past the coats, lifted the box, and felt its solid weight in his hands. The steel box sat heavy in Elliot's lap as he settled onto his mother's bed, the mattress creaking softly beneath him. His hands were steady as he inserted the key, but his heart hammered against his ribs. The lock turned with a solid click. Inside, a cream-colored envelope lay on top, his name written in Dolores's careful penmanship. Beneath it, a single business card rested on the box's felt bottom. He lifted the envelope first, breaking the seal with deliberate care. "Elliot, baby," the letter began, his mother's voice so clear in the words he could almost hear her speaking them. "I didn't want you to worry about me, so I kept this to myself. I know you. You would have tried to give it back or spread it around. This is yours. I made it for you, because you were always the one who showed up. Don't let nobody take what's yours, baby." Not nobody. He read it 3 times, each word sinking deeper. The business card beneath caught his eye. Okafor Estate and Wealth Management, Memphis, TN. The card was pristine, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. "Ray!" he called out, his voice rougher than usual. His brother appeared in the doorway, arms full of old photo albums they'd been sorting. "What you got there?" Ray asked, setting the albums down and moving closer. Elliot handed him the letter. Ray's eyes widened as he read, then narrowed. "Mama had a wealth manager?" "Apparently." Elliot pulled out his phone, checking the time. 2:15 p.m. He dialed the number on the card. A professional voice answered on the second ring. "Okafor Estate and Wealth Management. This is Elliot Washington. My mother was Dolores Washington. I just found your card in her papers." There was a pause, then, "Mr. Washington." "Yes, we've been expecting your call. Attorney Okafor has an opening at 3:30 today, if you can make it." 45 minutes later, Elliot and Ray sat in a well-appointed office in downtown Memphis. Attorney Priscilla Okafor, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, studied them both before opening a thick file on her desk. "Your mother," she began, "was one of my most remarkable clients. She came to me 30 years ago, referred by another domestic worker who attended her church. She had very specific goals and unshakable discipline." Priscilla laid out documents one by one. "Over 40 years of work, your mother built something extraordinary. 2 investment accounts, grown through monthly contributions and careful management. A life insurance policy she never missed a payment on. And the crown jewel, a commercial property on Madison Avenue, fully paid off, currently leased to Riverside Dental Group." Numbers jumped off the pages, numbers that made Elliot's hands grip his armrest tighter. Ray leaned forward, his breath catching. "The total estate," Priscilla continued, "including the property's current market value, the investment accounts, and the life insurance payout, comes to approximately $1.4 million. The room went silent. Ray whispered, "Jesus." 14 months ago," Priscilla went on, her voice steady, "your mother came to me to restructure everything. She was very specific about the timing and very clear about her concerns. The estate is structured precisely, Mr. Washington. Everything transfers directly to you, with smaller bequests to your brother and aunt." She pulled out another document, her finger tracking specific lines. "This is crucial. Under Georgia law, inherited assets are separate property. They cannot be divided in divorce proceedings, provided they're kept completely separate from marital accounts. Your mother made absolutely certain of this protection." Elliot's mind spun. "She knew about the divorce?" Priscilla met his eyes directly. "Your mother came to me and said, and I'm quoting her exactly, 'My daughter-in-law is building an exit. I want to make sure my son lands on his feet.'" Ray swore softly. Elliot sat perfectly still, processing each word. "She knew," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "She knew," Priscilla confirmed. "And she prepared." The meeting concluded with logistics and instructions. Elliot signed necessary documents with mechanical precision, tucked copies into his briefcase, shook Priscilla's hand. He and Ray walked to their separate cars in silence. Alone in his truck in his mother's apartment complex parking lot, Elliot finally allowed everything to crash over him. The inheritance, the protection. The love expressed not in words, but in 30 years of quiet preparation. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "Don't let nobody take what's yours, baby." The tears came suddenly, silently. He gripped the steering wheel and let them fall, grieving not just his mother's death now, but the depth of her love, a love so careful, so forward-thinking. It had reached beyond her grave to catch him when he needed it most. Elliot pulled into his driveway in Atlanta as the evening sun cast long shadows across the familiar brick facade. 2 days of processing the inheritance revelation had settled into his bones like a quiet strength. His truck's engine ticked as it cooled, and he took one deep breath before grabbing his bag. Celeste opened the door before he reached it, her smile practiced and gentle. "Welcome home," she said, stepping aside. "I hope everything got handled okay in Memphis." "It's handled," he replied simply, carrying his bag inside. The house smelled like scented candles, lavender, Celeste's favorite. She'd been burning them more lately, as if trying to mask something else in the air. He moved through their shared spaces with new awareness. The living room looked staged, like a real estate showing. Family photos had been thinned out, replaced with generic art. The stack of legal magazines Celeste usually kept on the coffee table was gone, probably already relocated to her home office upstairs. "I made dinner," Celeste called from the kitchen. "Nothing fancy, just that pasta you like." Elliot set his bag down in their bedroom. Their shared bedroom, technically, though he noticed her jewelry box was missing from the dresser. The closet door stood slightly open, and he could see gaps where her designer pieces used to hang. She'd been moving things gradually, he realized, preparing the scene before the curtain rose. That night, he lay awake listening to Celeste's measured breathing beside him. She slept with her phone face down on her nightstand, its silent notifications occasionally lighting up the ceiling. He watched the patterns of light and wondered how long she'd been crafting this exit. The next morning, after Celeste left for her community college teaching job, Elliot drove downtown to the offices of Kwame Ashford, attorney at law. The building was all glass and steel, reflecting Atlanta's autumn sky. Ashford's office matched the man, precise, professional, without unnecessary flourish. The attorney himself, a well-dressed man in his 40s, stood to greet Elliot with a firm handshake. "Priscilla Okafor spoke highly of you," Ashford said, gesturing to a chair. "She mentioned there are some complex asset protection elements we need to discuss." "Yes," Elliot replied. "But first I'd like your read on the divorce petition timing." Ashford opened the file, checking dates. "Filed 4 days before your mother's passing." "That's interesting timing." He looked up at Elliot. "In my experience, when someone files at a specific moment, they're either running from something or running toward something. Or both," Elliot offered. "Or both," Ashford agreed. "The petition is aggressive, seeking the house, half your retirement accounts, spousal support. She's positioning herself for maximum leverage." He studied Elliot's face. "But something tells me she's working with incomplete information." "She is." Elliot kept his voice steady. "I'd like to respond formally, accept the dissolution, but contest every financial claim. And I want to hold certain information back for now." Ashford nodded slowly. "The inheritance." "Yes, that's smart," Ashford said. "We'll file a basic response, challenge her claims, but keep our strongest cards close. People reveal more when they think they're winning." They spent the next hour reviewing strategy. Ashford took detailed notes, asked precise questions, and outlined their immediate steps. When they finished, he walked Elliot to the door. "One more thing," Ashford said. "Document everything from now on. Every conversation, every unusual expense, every change in routine. Build the record." That evening, Elliot sat across from Celeste at their dining room table. She'd made another careful meal, placed fresh flowers in the center, created another scene of domestic normalcy. "I think we both know this has been coming for a long time, Elliot," she said gently, reaching across to touch his hand. "I hope we can be adults about it." Elliot looked at her fingers resting on his skin. He thought about his mother's letter, about 30 years of quiet preparation, about love that plans ahead. "We can be adults about it," he said calmly, returning to his meal. Celeste's shoulders relaxed slightly. She smiled, satisfied with what she read, as acceptance, as resignation. Elliot continued eating, watching her from behind his own careful mask, letting her believe what she needed to believe. The food was good. He noted that too, how she was taking care to maintain appearances, to control the narrative. She'd always been good at narrative, but she didn't know about his mother's story yet, the one written in bank statements and property deeds, the one waiting quietly in the wings. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, Celeste occasionally checking her phone, Elliot watching her check her phone, each of them thinking they understood exactly what was happening at that table. The morning light slanted through the kitchen windows as Elliot spread bank statements across the table. 4 years of financial records, printed methodically from their joint accounts, while Celeste lectured on real estate law across town. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold beside his laptop. He approached the audit like any other system analysis at work, looking for patterns, tracking flows, identifying anomalies. His fingers moved across columns of numbers with practiced precision, highlighting transfers, noting dates. The same focus he brought to facility operations, he now brought to dissecting his marriage's financial skeleton. The first transfer appeared 3 years and 2 months ago. $1,800 moved from their joint savings to an unfamiliar account number. 2 weeks later, another transfer. $2,200. The pattern emerged slowly. Irregular amounts, irregular timing, but persistent. Sometimes as little as $1,000, occasionally as high as $3,500. Never enough to trigger the bank's automatic alerts. Always spaced just far enough apart to blend into their regular expenses. Elliot created a spreadsheet, entering each transfer methodically. The total grew: $10,000, $25,000, $45,000. His expression remained neutral, but his jaw tightened as the number climbed. By the time he finished, the spreadsheet showed $74,000 moved out of their joint savings over 38 months. He stared at the unfamiliar account number that had received the transfers. Something about its format suggested a different bank entirely. He pulled up Celeste's financial disclosure document, the mandatory filing her attorney had submitted with the divorce petition. She would have been required to list all accounts. There it was, buried on page 4. The same account number, listed as a personal savings account at Regional Trust Bank. She had disclosed it because she had to, but she hadn't expected him to trace the transfers. She had counted on his traditional lack of interest in their day-to-day finances to protect her trail. Elliot gathered the statements, his spreadsheet, and the disclosure documents into a fresh folder. He thought about the careful planning this represented. Not a desperate escape, but a methodical extraction. 3 years of systematic withdrawals. 3 years of standing beside him, sharing his bed, while quietly bleeding their accounts. The next morning, he sat across from Kwame Ashford, watching the attorney review the documentation. Ashford's expression grew increasingly serious as he followed the money trail Elliot had assembled. "This is textbook dissipation of marital assets," Ashford said finally, looking up. "Systematic diversion of shared funds without disclosure or consent. The pattern is clear, the documentation is solid, and the timing, leading up to divorce filing, makes the intent obvious." Elliot nodded. "There's something else. A name I saw on some paperwork about a year ago. Devonte Marsh. It was a real estate document Celeste left on the counter. Some kind of partnership filing. I didn't think anything of it at the time." Ashford made a note. "We should look into that. I know an excellent private investigator, Brenda Osei. She specializes in financial and real estate documentation. Would you authorize me to retain her?" "Do it," Elliot said. "Whatever it costs." Ashford placed the call immediately, speaking briefly with Brenda and arranging to send her the relevant information. "She'll start right away," he told Elliot. "She's very thorough." That evening, Elliot sat in his home office, ostensibly working late but actually waiting. At 8:47 p.m., an email arrived from Brenda Osei. The subject line read simply, "Preliminary Findings." He opened it, reading carefully. The first paragraph confirmed what something in him had already known. Celeste and Devonte Marsh were co-signatories on a real estate LLC registered in South Carolina. The company had been formed 2 years ago. Elliot leaned back in his chair, processing this new piece of the puzzle. 2 years. The LLC predated the systematic transfers by a full year. This wasn't just an exit strategy. This was a parallel life, constructed deliberately while his own life served as its scaffolding. From downstairs, he heard Celeste's key in the door. Her heels clicked on the hardwood as she called out, "Elliot, I brought dinner from that Thai place you like." "Be right down," he called back, his voice perfectly steady. He closed the email, shut down his computer, and took a deep breath. The time for confrontation wasn't yet. First, he needed to see how deep this construction went. He stood, straightened his shirt, and headed downstairs to share another careful meal with his wife, carrying the weight of what he now knew like a stone in his chest. The kitchen was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator as Elliot sat at the table, reading Brenda's preliminary report on his laptop. Upstairs, Celeste slept, unaware that her carefully constructed world was beginning to unravel. The full report arrived in sections over the next 2 days. Each new document felt like another brick being added to a wall of betrayal. DM and Associates, Residential Holdings. The LLC's official name seemed almost mocking in its professional blandness. Celeste Durham Washington, listed as a 30% equity partner. The ownership structure laid out in clean corporate language that stripped away any pretense of accident or misunderstanding. Brenda's investigation revealed 4 properties, 2 in coastal Georgia, 2 in South Carolina. Mid-range residential homes, the kind of steady income-generating investments that formed the backbone of many real estate portfolios. But it was the seed funding that made Elliot's hands tighten on the papers. A $60,000 home equity line of credit drawn against their Atlanta house. He remembered the day they bought that house. How proud he'd been to provide it. To see Celeste's face light up at the crown molding, the hardwood floors, the kitchen she'd always wanted. Now he stared at a HELOC application bearing his forged signature, dated 18 months ago. His name, not written in his hand, unlocking equity he'd built over a decade of mortgage payments. He laid the documents out methodically. The HELOC application, the fund transfers, the property deeds. The story they told was clear. Celeste had used their home's equity to fund another man's business ventures. She hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd leveraged their shared foundation to build something that excluded him entirely. Elliot called Kwame Ashford immediately. The attorney's voice was grave when he saw the documentation. "This goes beyond divorce proceedings," Ashford said. "You need to speak with Damaris Hollis. She specializes in financial crimes. I'll connect you right now." Hollis joined the call, her voice sharp and focused. She asked precise questions about the HELOC, the timing, Elliot's discovery of it. "The forged signature is actionable," she confirmed. "We're looking at potential bank fraud, which opens up both civil and criminal avenues. This can proceed entirely separate from the divorce if you choose." "What are my options?" Elliot asked. "We can file criminal charges immediately," Hollis explained, "or we can hold this in reserve. Documentation's solid, statute of limitations gives us time. The choice of timing is yours." Elliot thought about Celeste sleeping upstairs, still confident in her carefully structured exit. "Hold for now," he decided, "but prepare everything. I want to be ready when the moment's right." Later that night, after Hollis had sent over her preliminary documentation, Elliot noticed a box he hadn't unpacked yet, sent from Memphis by Aunt Gloria, full of his mother's things. He opened it, needing something to ground him after hours of processing betrayal. Among old church programs and faded receipts, he found a photograph. The colors had softened with age, but the image was clear. 9-year-old Elliot standing with Dolores outside Greater Harvest, both of them grinning wide enough to light up the frame. His mother's Sunday best dress, his clip-on tie slightly crooked. He remembered that, his first time serving as a junior usher, standing up straight and proud beside his mama. He turned the photo over. There, in Dolores's careful handwriting, "This one's going to be something." He ran his fingers over the words, feeling the indentations her pen had left in the paper. The simple faith in those words hit him harder than all of Brenda's reports combined. His mother had seen him clearly, not just his potential for success, but his capacity for dignity in the face of betrayal. She had prepared for this moment years before it arrived, building him a foundation that couldn't be forged away or transferred out from under him. Elliot slipped the photo into his wallet, right behind his driver's license. The weight of it felt right there, close to his heart, a reminder of who he was and where he came from. Let Celeste think she was the architect of this ending. His mother had designed something far more enduring, a son who could stand firm when the ground shifted beneath him. Elliot's phone rang while he was reviewing documents at his kitchen table. Celeste's name lit up the screen. He answered on the third ring, his voice neutral. "I think we can make this easier," Celeste said, her tone carrying that practiced warmth she used when steering conversations. I've been thinking about how to resolve this efficiently. Elliot said nothing, letting the silence prompt her to continue. I know this is hard for you, she went on, especially with everything happening at once. So I want to offer something generous. You keep your entire 401k, no division. In exchange, you sign over the house to me and waive any spousal support claims. Clean break. No dragged-out legal battle. She paused, waiting for his relief, his gratitude. Elliot looked down at his mother's photograph, now permanently stationed on his table. That's thoughtful of you to offer, he said evenly. Let me consider it. Of course, Celeste replied, satisfaction creeping into her voice. Take a day or two, but I think this is best for everyone. After they hung up, Elliot immediately called Kwame Ashford and reported the direct contact. She's trying to lock in the house before everything else comes to light, Ashford noted. Document the call details for me. Time, duration, exact wording of the offer. The following morning, Elliot drove to Memphis. In Priscilla Okafor's office, they executed the formal inheritance transfer. Every account was established under his name only, at a separate institution he'd never used before. The commercial properties lease agreement was updated with his information. As Priscilla walked him through each document, Elliot felt the foundation beneath him solidifying. The dental practice lease payment will start flowing to your new account next month, Priscilla confirmed. Everything is completely separate from any marital assets. She can't touch any of it. My mother thought of everything, Elliot said quietly. She did, Priscilla agreed. And now we honor that planning by using it exactly as she intended. Back in Atlanta, Elliot called Ray and Aunt Gloria to the city. They gathered in his temporary rental's living room, Ray pacing with contained energy, Aunt Gloria sitting straight-backed in an armchair, her Bible in her lap. Elliot laid out everything methodically. The $74,000 in transferred funds, the South Carolina LLC, the forged HELOC signature, the inheritance, the legal strategy taking shape. Ray's jaw clenched tighter with each revelation. She did all this while you were taking care of Mama? While you were sending money home every month? Stay focused, Elliot told him. I need you sharp, not angry. There's a difference. Aunt Gloria's fury was quieter, but no less potent. She opened her Bible, not to read from it, but to remove a small envelope. Your Mama wrote this for me before she passed. Said to open it if things went bad with Celeste. She knew, baby. She saw it coming. Elliot took the envelope but didn't open it. Some words needed to wait for the right moment. I've instructed Ashford to request a formal settlement conference, he explained. Both parties, both legal teams, in one room. Everything comes out there. She thinks you're broken, Ray said. That's why she made that offer about the 401k. Let her think it, Elliot replied. Right now, that's working for us. Aunt Gloria set her Bible aside and went to the kitchen. She returned with a pound cake she'd brought from Memphis. Your Mama's recipe, she said, cutting thick slices. We plan better when we're fed. They spent the next hour reviewing every detail, every document, every planned revelation. Ray gradually stopped pacing, his energy channeling into focused attention. Aunt Gloria asked precise questions about timing and sequence. The pound cake disappeared slice by slice. That evening, after they left, Elliot stood in his temporary bedroom ironing his charcoal suit. The fabric released small clouds of steam as he worked, each press of the iron deliberate and thorough. The room was quiet except for the soft hiss of steam and the rustling of fabric. He'd worn this suit to his mother's funeral. Now he'd wear it to dismantle the elaborate fiction Celeste had built around their marriage. The symmetry felt right. An ending contained within an ending, his mother's protection extending beyond her death. Every piece was in position. Every document was in order. Every legal instrument was prepared. Tomorrow, in a conference room downtown, Celeste would discover exactly what patience looked like, when it finally stopped waiting. Elliot arrived at Ashford's office building 40 minutes early, parking his truck in the underground garage. Ray and Aunt Gloria had come to his temporary rental that morning, bringing breakfast and quiet strength. They sat with him while he ate, not saying much, their presence enough. Now, in Ashford's elegant conference room, Elliot adjusted his charcoal suit jacket and took his seat on one side of the polished table. Morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the empty chairs. He placed his folder of documents precisely in front of him, squared the edges, then folded his hands and waited. At exactly 9 a.m., Celeste walked in with her attorney, Jordan Price. She wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than Elliot's first car. Her heels clicked sharply on the hardwood floor as she took her seat across from him, barely glancing his way. Price, silver-haired, and Brooks Brothers polished, arranged his own documents with practiced efficiency. Kwame Ashford entered last, nodding professionally to everyone before taking his seat beside Elliot. The room settled into expectant silence. "Let's begin," Price said, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man who believed he was about to close a straightforward deal. "My client has been more than reasonable in her petition. She's seeking an equitable division of marital assets, specifically the family home, half of the retirement accounts, and temporary spousal support to maintain stability during this." He paused, looking directly at Elliot. "We believe these terms are fair and hope to reach an amicable resolution today." Ashford waited a measured beat before responding. "Before we discuss your client's demands, I'd like to introduce some relevant financial documentation." He opened his folder with deliberate slowness. "First, we need to establish the complete picture of my client's current assets." He withdrew a thick stack of papers and began distributing copies. "This is the certified documentation of Mr. Washington's inherited estate from his late mother, Dolores Washington." He laid out the papers methodically. Investment account statements, property deed, life insurance policy. The total value is $1.4 million, including a fully leased commercial property in Memphis. All of these assets were structured and transferred under Georgia law as protected separate property, completely outside the marital estate. Celeste's composure flickered. Price began scanning the documents rapidly. "Second," Ashford continued, producing another set of papers, "we have documented evidence of systematic dissipation of marital assets." He pushed the bank statements across the table. "Over 38 months, your client transferred approximately $74,000 from joint accounts into an undisclosed personal account. We have every transaction logged and traced." He pressed a button on the conference phone. "I have Damaris Hollis, financial crimes attorney, on the line." "Ms. Hollis?" "Present," a sharp female voice confirmed through the speaker. Celeste's hands tightened around her pen. Price was now reading furiously. "And third," Ashford said, his voice somehow both quieter and more penetrating, "we have documentation of HELOC fraud." He produced the loan application. This home equity line of credit was opened against the marital residence using a forged signature. The funds, $60,000, were transferred to DM & Associates Residential Holdings, an LLC registered in South Carolina, with your client listed as a 30% equity partner alongside one Devontae Marsh. The company has acquired 4 properties using these fraudulently obtained funds as seed capital. The room went absolutely still. Celeste's face had drained of color. Price immediately stood. "I need to request a brief recess to confer with my client." "Granted," Ashford said smoothly. 15 minutes. In the hallway, Elliot sat quietly on a leather bench, hands folded in his lap. He could hear raised whispers from the small conference room where Celeste and Price had retreated. He didn't strain to make out the words. He didn't need to. When they reconvened, Celeste's confident posture had collapsed into rigid tension. Price's tie was slightly askew. Before anyone else could speak, Elliot addressed Celeste directly. "I want you to understand something, Celeste," he said, his voice quiet but carrying. "I'm not angry anymore. I was, for a minute. But my mother, the woman you couldn't be bothered to grieve properly, she made sure I would be fine. She did that because she paid attention to you. She saw what I didn't want to see." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not going to spend one more hour of my life being upset about you, but I am going to spend whatever it takes making sure every legal consequence of what you did finds you. Not because I hate you, because you committed crimes, and people who commit crimes face consequences. That's not revenge. That's just how it works." The revised settlement terms were presented. The house would be sold, with documented fraud damages deducted from Celeste's share. Her retirement accounts would offset the $74,000 in transferred assets. Spousal support was denied based on documented misconduct. The LLC properties were flagged for ongoing civil and criminal inquiry. Price whispered something to Celeste. She picked up the pen with fingers that trembled slightly. She signed without reading, without speaking, without looking at Elliot. Then she stood and walked out, her heels no longer clicking quite so confidently against the floor. The late autumn sun cast long shadows across Elmwood Cemetery as Elliot's truck rolled through the iron gates. Ray sat in the passenger seat, holding a bouquet of blue hydrangeas, their mother's favorite. Aunt Gloria's car was already parked near Dolores's section, her tall figure standing straight-backed beside the headstone. Elliot parked and took a slow breath before stepping out. The grass crunched under his shoes, still crisp with morning frost. He'd been back in Atlanta for 2 weeks, living in a furnished rental while the house he'd shared with Celeste sat on the market. The space felt temporary, but clean, like a hotel room where you could breathe easier because nothing there held memory. "Morning, baby," Aunt Gloria said as they approached. She hugged them both, her embrace carrying the familiar scent of vanilla extract and church perfume. Ray laid the flowers against the headstone. Elliot stood quietly, hands in his pockets, reading the dates that marked his mother's life. He didn't need to speak. Everything that mattered had already been said, through paperwork and legal proceedings, through the quiet infrastructure she'd built beneath their feet while they weren't looking. His phone buzzed. Ashford's name lit up the screen. "Mr. Washington," Ashford's precise voice came through. "I wanted to update you. The bank has formally referred the HELOC matter to their fraud investigation unit. They're treating it as a serious case." Elliot listened, watching a dry leaf skitter across his mother's grave. "Devontae Marsh's LLC has been frozen pending review. 2 of the properties are specifically flagged in the inquiry. Ms. Washington has retained criminal defense counsel." Ashford paused. "And the college's compliance office is conducting an internal review of her professional financial disclosures. She listed the house as an asset on several documents." "Thank you for letting me know," Elliot said quietly. He ended the call without elaboration. Ray looked at him questioningly. Elliot just shook his head slightly. They'd talk about it later. After the cemetery, Elliot drove to Priscilla Okafor's office. The familiar weight of the building's brass door handle felt different now, less like entering someone else's territory, and more like returning to something that belonged partly to him. Priscilla greeted him with professional warmth, gesturing to the chair where he'd first learned about his inheritance. "How are you settling in Atlanta?" "Actually," Elliot said, "I wanted to discuss the Memphis property, the dental office lease." They spent an hour reviewing the commercial property's performance, its maintenance schedule, its potential. The dental practice was a stable tenant with 10 years left on their lease. The building itself was well maintained. Dolores had never skimped on repairs. "I want to hold it," Elliot said finally. "Keep building what she started." Priscilla nodded, a small smile touching her lips. She'd like that. That evening, Ray drove them to Miss Ida's Soul Food Kitchen, a small restaurant they'd visited countless times as boys. The vinyl booths were the same faded red. the walls still covered in old photos of Memphis musicians and civil rights leaders. The smell of cornbread and collard greens wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. "Remember how Mama used to bring us here after church sometimes?" Ray asked, stirring sugar into his sweet tea. "Only when we'd behaved the whole service, though." Elliot smiled slightly, which meant mostly me. "You couldn't sit still to save your life." "Man, shut up," Ray laughed. "I was a child of God, expressing my joy." They ordered their usual smothered pork chops for Ray, meatloaf for Elliot. The food came steaming on mismatched plates, just like always. "You know what gets me?" Ray said after a while. "She never told anybody. Not me, not Aunt Gloria. Just kept building, year after year." "That's what patience looks like," Elliot said, cutting into his meatloaf. Ray shook his head. "Nah, brother. That's what love looks like." Elliot was quiet for a moment, fork paused halfway to his mouth. He thought about the photo in his wallet. Gap-toothed little boy and his mother, standing proud outside Greater Harvest. He thought about 40 years of small decisions, adding up in the dark like interest. He caught their waitress's eye. "Can we see the dessert menu?" Morning sunlight warmed the wooden planks of Elliot's back porch as he settled into his favorite chair, coffee mug steaming in hand. Cardinals darted between the crepe myrtle trees he'd planted 3 months ago. Small now, but they'd grow. Time and patience would see to that. The house sat on a quiet street in East Memphis, 15 minutes from Greater Harvest Baptist Church, and 10 minutes from where his mother's apartment used to be. It wasn't fancy. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, solid brick with a deep backyard. But it was well built, like everything else Elliot chose these days. The kind of house that would last. He'd closed on it 4 months ago, after renting in Memphis for a year to make sure the move felt right. It did. Atlanta had served its purpose, taught its lessons, but Memphis was where things grew. His phone buzzed with an early email from work. Something about shipping container logistics that would need his attention when he got to the office. The promotion to operations director at Memphis Global Freight had come 3 months ago, partly because of his reputation for solving complex problems, partly because he carried himself differently now. He no longer managed other people's comfort at the expense of his own. The commercial property, his mother's dental office building, had just signed another 5-year lease extension. The tenant liked how responsive the management was, how problems got fixed before they became problems. Elliot had learned that from Dolores, too, though he hadn't known he was learning it at the time. His investment accounts were growing steadily under Priscilla's wealth management team, the same people who had helped his mother build for 40 years. They were teaching him the long game, how to think in decades, not quarters, how to let money work quietly in the background while you built other things. Ray called most mornings on his way to work. They talked about nothing important: sports scores, weekend plans, which cousin was getting married next. But under the easy conversation ran a deeper current. They were carrying forward what their mother built. Not just the money, the patience, the clarity, the ability to work without needing credit. Aunt Gloria had tried setting him up with her church friend's daughter last month, a lovely woman who taught 3rd grade and had kind eyes. Elliot had been polite, but clear. He wasn't ready. Not because he was still hurt, that had faded like an old bruise, but because he was learning to be complete on his own first. He'd rushed into marriage at 26, thinking another person could make him whole. He knew better now. The news about Celeste had come through Ashford's office last week, delivered in a brief email. She'd accepted a plea deal on reduced fraud charges, receiving probation and court-ordered restitution. Her teaching position at the college was gone. The LLC that she'd built with Devonte Marsh had been dissolved under regulatory scrutiny. Marsh himself was tied up in civil litigation with multiple parties. Elliot had read the email once, then deleted it. He thought about her rarely now, and when he did, it was without heat, like remembering a fever that had broken long ago. The photograph sat on the porch table beside his coffee mug. 9-year-old Elliot and Dolores outside Greater Harvest, both grinning into the camera. He studied it in the morning light. His mother's hand rested on his shoulder, proud and protective. She'd already started building by then, though none of them knew it. Already making small, quiet decisions that would add up to something massive, like interest compounding in the dark. Elliot picked up the photo, ran his thumb along its worn edge. She'd seen so far ahead. Not just the money, though that had saved him. She'd seen what he could be if he had a foundation under him, if he had time to grow straight and strong, like the crepe myrtles would. He set the photo back down beside his coffee. The morning was warming up, the cardinals still darting between his trees. Inside, his laptop waited with work emails. His calendar showed a meeting with Priscilla later to discuss a new investment strategy. Ray was coming over for dinner to help him hang shelves in the home office. Elliot took a last sip of coffee, standing up from his chair. He had things to do. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.